on this Friday, June 28th, a day that marks a major shift in this presidential race. It's something you can basically feel and that many felt in their core, the emotion hitting probably before the logic or any intellectual observations, even as President Biden first walked out to the stage at this debate, which his campaign pushed for earlier than ever, and then delivered a performance that has, for now, upended this race, and done so swiftly. The recriminations had begun long before he and Trump walked off that very stage. This is a debate that is certainly memorable, but not in a very happy way. It seems to be another in a series of shared American experiences and memories that feel more infamous than famous, more traumatic than cathartic. And so tonight, together with you right now, as we're still within these first 24 hours of that face-off, we are going to take stock with the evidence, trying to look at the significance and the fallout and the actual real possibilities. We're not going to devolve into or take too much time with the screenplay scenarios, because while there is talk of screenplay-style solutions, what matters more for what all of this says about what we're going to do is what's possible. Indeed, the screenplay talk, the fantasy talk, may tell you more about reactions within the Democratic Party. It may matter in that sense, but not in the screenplays coming true. What is true, and what we've seen in this short period between the debate and in these next few weeks of the two-party conventions, is that we have a campaign going on. And it is a campaign where the nominees have been chosen. And today you had a clear indication that, against this backdrop, Joe Biden knows that he fell down at this debate because he referred to getting knocked down and how to get back up while speaking in North Carolina.
When you get knocked down, you get back up. I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I give you my word as a Biden, I would not be running again if I didn't believe with all my heart and soul I can do this job.
So, first, Biden knows how he did and how it was viewed. He just referred to it. He is the one using the analogy of being knocked to the ground. And second, President Biden, seeing the same coverage and headlines, and yes, palpable concern that everyone else who's paying attention is seeing, is right now today shutting down any talk of a change in this nomination that he already won. Reiterating he's running with his full belief that he's up to the job. Biden's campaign using today's appearance to try to show that in a very real way, that whatever people saw last night, he's out there, he's busy, he's energized, they say, and he's up to the job. And they are arguing that while the debate did start out poorly, they don't even dispute that, they point to the fact that over time he did get in some decent lines. Now, this is not the first time Democratic elites have strong reactions and public anxiety. And it's not the first time even Joe Biden has been counted out. But again, following the evidence tonight, this is measurably wider and deeper than some of those other moments. We checked, and if you look out in swing states, you see some pretty rough local headlines. One of the largest papers in the key state of Nevada, everything that was discussed, all the policies, all the exchanges, their headline for their readers was Biden shows his age. So that's out there. Biden's problems also distracted away from Trump's huge and outrageous lies and claims last night. Now, some other papers around the country, I want to tell you, did hit both candidates. Detroit News talked about how they lobbed insults in Pennsylvania, key state. You have headlines about them trading barbs. In Colorado, there was a comparison of Biden's fumbles to the implication of Trump's falsehoods. And you can be the judge of whether you'd rather have an occasional fumble or a serial liar. Now, any reliable gauge of how this affects millions of voters, if it affects them at all, will take some time. So you have to keep that in mind with all the snap reactions. But the snap polls, which I wouldn't say are super reliable, do register something, kind of an instant take. And the take was overwhelmingly a view that Trump won. Remember, to get to 67%, that includes a lot of people statistically who have never voted for Trump, who didn't plan to vote for him, who aren't Republicans, saying, well, he won. Anecdotal interviews have also captured a flavor from last night as people felt disappointment with both candidates and thus with the current choice. It's politics we're dealing with. Reactions and optics, the pictures in people's head, it all does matter. And this is one of those times where that picture was not polarized. It was not two different Americas. It was not really Earth 1 and Earth 2. There was an almost uniform concern, even including from top Democrats in public, that Biden materially hurt his chances, exposed vulnerability on the very thing that, fairly or not, a lot of people, including independents and some Democrats, worry about him. It's a reaction that ranged from an understandable kind of evidence-based concern to outright televised panic.
I do think people feel like that we are confronting a crisis.
One thing that mattered more than anything else tonight, and that was Joe Biden's demeanor.
It's kind of a DEFCON 1 moment.
From the moment he opened his mouth and answering the first question he got, I think America looked and said, this man should not be reelected.
I think the panic had set in. There were going to be discussions about whether he should continue.
They're 3 years apart. They seemed about 30 years apart tonight.
He had to prove to the American people was that he had the energy, he had the stamina, and he didn't do that.
He tragically did not rise to the occasion last night.
It's not just panic, it's pain of what we saw tonight.
Panic and pain. One writer said if Biden does lose that election, quote, history will record it took just 10 minutes to destroy a presidency. Now, there are Democrats who also question whether Biden should remain on the ticket. There is no mechanism to force a change of the nominee, to force a change of who's on the ticket from the outside. Joe Biden won the race under the rules. He has the delegates. There's also no precedent in history for a change this late. No incumbent president has dropped out of the race so late in the campaign cycle, as the New York Times noted in covering some of those discussions today. The only way that Biden will not be the nominee and on the November ballot is if he decides to break that precedent and drop out. He has not been open to that, and he ruled it out again today. If Joe Biden did abdicate the nomination, that would hand a vacancy and a quite complex, rushed political problem to his party and in a sense, to the country. There's no time nor state mechanisms to hold rushed primaries. There's no path for how to pick a replacement. A replacement wouldn't have a mandate from past primary state wins or the seasoning that comes from running for years, which is how we typically do it in this country. And if there were no agreement reached, and it's not clear that an agreement could be reached very quickly given what we're talking about, even if hypothetically the person who said today he's not dropping out did drop out, there would then be a battle that could stretch into the convention or later. I told you we would deal in evidence tonight. Let me show you the actual calendar. Next month, Donald Trump, who's been convicted of a felony in New York, will be sentenced following that verdict that he reached in the hush money trial. A few days later, you have the Republican convention. In the following month, you have the Democratic convention. That's a week in July and August of those two conventions, and legally, according to the rules, August would be the very last time that the party is consecrating what it already picked, the delegate clinching of the nomination by President Biden. September is the second scheduled presidential debate. That is on the books. We will see what the candidates do. And when early voting begins. If you're talking about changing something, it needs to be well in advance of when ballots are printed, sent, and cast. You don't want to be in court arguing that a vote for Democrat X should really be counted as a vote for Democrat Y. By October, you get the early voting in the swing states, which tend to decide these things. And this calendar is a reality. The Democratic Party rules are a reality. And Biden's debate performance is a reality. And Biden's vow, made again today to finish this race, is a reality. Any planned debate, clash, or fantasy involving other different candidates would have to face those realities. So what can I tell you? You may have heard other things. You may hear chatter about other things. There's a lot of talk going on. But if we're dealing in realities, and again, my job is not to tell you the realities that sound best or that are most popular or that might make you like or dislike the news. I'm just telling you the actual realities based on the work and fact-checking and experts that we consult every day. And this is one of those nights where people are wondering how things work and what the realities are. Here's the reality. It is measurably unlikely, not technically impossible, who can say what's possible, but measurably unlikely that you would have a change in the Democratic Party nominee. And all of this that I'm telling you is pretty well known. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And you probably don't need an anchorman to remind you of these things I just mentioned, because if you follow the news or politics, you know all this. You know the primaries are over. You know he has the delegate convention lead. You know that he said he's running. And now you know today he reiterated that, even well aware of the views of the debate performance. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. The political winds are blowing against President Biden today. And he already won the nomination, so under the rules, he is the only person who can release and abdicate his nomination. The debate may have changed a lot today, tomorrow, next week, even next month, but has not changed the core choice, which we know so many in our country and our nation already revile, much as they revile Congress and the Supreme Court and other things. And here's the choice. It is between an incumbent who does face real questions over his professional competence and a challenger who is a failed coup leader, convicted felon, facing real questions over his ethical competence. Now, if lies, coups, and crimes were a degenerative ailment, well, Donald Trump might have had a much harder time last night on the optics. But objections to this rough set of choices are unlikely to change the choices, to change the ballots being printed in reality. That's why today might be very well the worst day that Democrats have had in the Biden presidency, as they openly admit they don't like their choice, like so many Americans, and they are stuck with it, which Joe Biden reiterated today. The party's leaders know that only Biden could change this plan, and he says he's not doing that. So with the choice made, they are still dealing with and thus publicly backing what I'm telling you is the reality. He's written 10 books about American presidents. There may be no other journalist who speaks to so many presidents across so many periods, not just when they want to be heard from or at their press conferences. He spent much time discussing weighty issues of the day with many different presidents, including former President Trump, who was on that stage last night. His most recent book dealt with Donald Trump's handling of COVID and includes a series of the so-called Trump tapes, lengthy discussions and interviews during that White House and national crisis. The legendary journalist and two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, associate editor of the Washington Post, Bob Woodward, joins me now. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
When you look at last night's debate, what comes through for you? I can hear you fine, yeah. When you look at the debate, what comes through for you, and what do you say to people who think this engenders doubt or disqualification discussions about the president?
Well, Biden's performance was so bad, so awful. The way I look at it as a reporter, there must be some explanation. What really happened? He was preparing for this a long time. He knew it was consequential, and then it was this bad. It's like a golfer who plays country club golf in the 90s, all of a sudden shoots 140, and you wonder, something went wrong. He broke his foot or his ankle. I think the answer here is in reporting, in seeking very aggressively an explanation what happened here. We don't want it to come out in some book or some memoir in a couple of years or a decade. We need to know now. And I tell you, it was so bad, so awful. I mean, I don't want to speculate on possible explanations, but suppose he had, I want to speculate because I think the answer is in the realm you always talk about, evidence. And maybe he had some knockdown, drag-out fight with his campaign managers. There is an explanation, and that's where the repertorial energy should go, in my view.
Yeah, and Bob, you've heard, you follow this closely, how Washington is taking this in. When you hear calls to reconsider the nomination or the idea that maybe Biden should drop out, do you think that's merited now or too early for that talk?
Well, it's inevitable because his performance was, I sat there and watched it, and I could not believe it. I said, not only is this a political hydrogen bomb for him and the Democratic Party, what happened? What happened? And I think something happened. And if you look back at this, he holed up for days working on this, preparing for it. He knew its significance. Somebody who is a practiced politician like Biden will internalize and rehearse lines. There must have been some of that, but he got thrown off his own game somehow. And I really think there is some sort of very large explanation for this, because it was so, it was almost impossible.
Let me read to you one comparison that I think overlaps with part of what you're raising. This is from Stephen Collinson, a writer. There's been no public sign that Biden is, quote, unable to fulfill the duties of the presidency, which include tough decisions on national security, just returned from 2 grueling foreign trips. But on Thursday's evidence, his ability to communicate with the country and even to sell his own vision for a second term is severely compromised. That we read because it makes the comparison that I think many Americans are feeling. And then I have a breaking item here from the New York Times editorial board, which, as you know, is different from the reporter side. I just want to remind the audience, the New York Times reporters are just gathering all the facts, but we have breaking news from the New York Times editorial board. Speaking for one of the key papers in the country, the editorial board says, quote, to serve his country, President Biden should leave the race. And they describe the threats posed by Donald Trump and say, and I'm reading this to you, Bob, and I imagine it being breaking news, you're hearing it for the first time, quote, the president appeared on Thursday night as the shadow of a great public servant, struggled to explain what he'd accomplished, struggled to respond to Trump, struggled to hold Trump accountable for his lies, failures, and chilling plans. And then it says, quote, more than once he struggled to make it to the end of a sentence. Printed out, I will show viewers, this runs about 3 pages. It's a lengthy and somewhat considered piece. It's also in the era of our fast reactions, a quick reaction to last night, which is inside the 24-hour window. Your response to that news, Mr. Woodward, and do you think it is too hasty?
It's not necessarily hasty, but the energy needs to go at what really happened. Look, step back. If a building blows up in downtown of some city, the story will be what happened, and then the story will be, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And that's where I'm very, very curious, because this was a mega disaster. I was so shocked. I could not. I said, did this really happen? And I listened to replays. Now, explain candidate Biden's staff, people close to him. I want to hear that explanation, because that's where it will guide us in a direction, I think, to understand it. Can't downplay it, though. Can't kind of say, oh, well, it was just a bad night. It was an incoherent night.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.